Well, good afternoon. I hope and pray that you're well. We're starting a new series today on looking at the 7 signs in John's Gospel. We're beginning with John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding between 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And this is the word of the Lord. Well, if there's any story from the Bible which is going to get the interest of Australians, then it's this story of Jesus turning water into wine. What more could Australians want than someone who can produce great quality alcohol at a party? Well, miracles didn't just stop in the past though. While Jesus performed the miracle of turning the water into wine, today we have the miracle of Baptists and Methodists turning wine into grape juice and Ribena cordial. Somehow it's not quite the same. This miracle of turning water into wine is described by John as the first sign which Jesus performed, which revealed his glory. Today we're starting a new series looking at the 7 signs in John's Gospel. As we look at this story, we're going to consider what is the point of these signs. How did the first sign come about? And what's the meaning of turning water into wine? So why are the clearer miracles of Jesus in John's Gospel called signs? I call them clearer miracles because Jesus sometimes displays miraculous knowledge of people, of what they're thinking, and the like. But the larger miracles, if you like, turning water into wine, providing food, healing, etc., they're called signs in John's Gospel. Well, to think about what's the purpose of the signs in John's Gospel, we could ask, what is the purpose of a sign full stop? A sign points us to something or someone. A sign's purpose isn't for people to look and marvel at the sign and never move on. When you're driving along and you see a sign saying, "Look out 300 meters ahead on the left," the goal isn't to pull over and then stare at the sign and go, "Oh wow, what an amazing sign. Look at the way they've done the lettering and look at the metallic imagery." No, the goal is that you know that in 300 meters ahead you should pull over and then you'll see an amazing sign, amazing sight. Look at that. No, the goal of a sign is that we would appreciate what it's pointing to. Likewise, wouldn't it be crazy if I spent more time appreciating or valuing my wedding ring than I did my marriage? My wedding ring is a sign that I'm married. The purpose of signs is to point us to what those signs represent. So then, going back to John's Gospel, the reason why the more obvious miracles of Jesus are called signs is that they point the reader to Jesus. In particular, we're told that it was these signs through which Jesus revealed his glory. Revealing Jesus' glory means that the signs point people to both the awesomeness which Jesus has as a person, but also to his position, status, and role. These signs point us to who Jesus is and what he came to do. And like with a sign for a lookout or the sign that is a wedding ring, the goal of these signs wasn't that people would focus upon the signs in and of themselves. Indeed, we'll see that Jesus became frustrated when people did just focus upon the signs. The miracles were to direct people to Jesus and prompt people to trust him. Knowing then that a sign is to point us away from itself, how does turning water into wine direct people to Jesus? Or to put it another way, what aspect of Jesus' glory is this sign pointing to? That's what we're going to focus upon in today's message. But before we do that, we're going to take a moment to have a look at the interaction between Jesus and his mum, which can be a little confusing for us in the 21st century. The interaction between Jesus and his mother, Mary, comes at the start of this account, because it's Jesus' mum who brings to Jesus's attention that they have run out of wine. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." While we can't be certain, it appears that this was a wedding of a relative or a friend of Jesus, because Jesus, as well as his mother, as well as the disciples, being from the surrounding area, they were all there. They were invited there. And his mother is actively involved, Jesus' mother is actively involved in assisting at the banquet when they run out of wine. Running out of wine at such a banquet was a serious cultural faux pas. Running out of wine at a wedding was so serious that you could be open to litigation for failing to provide what should be expected of a party. And we thought modern day Karens were bad. It is to help a relative or friend who is about to face significant embarrassment that Mary brings the situation to Jesus. What Jesus' mother expected Jesus to do about this problem is uncertain, but it's clear that she had absolute confidence that Jesus could do something. We're told Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine," and then we have what appears to be a rather abrupt reply from Jesus. "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." The opening words here are even more confusing if you translate them literally from Greek, which is what the New Testament was written in. If you translate it literally from Greek into English, we have Jesus replying, "What to me and to you, woman?" And that sounds pretty, out there. Like, whoa, if I said something like that to my mum, I'd probably get a clip over the ear for it. So you can see why we need to give a little bit of time to this. However, seeking to answer this isn't just to work out if Jesus is being a rude son or not. Understanding more of this interaction should help us consider more of how this miracle is a sign revealing Jesus' glory. To start with, it's important that we understand that Jesus using the term woman is completely acceptable in the culture. While not exact, the closest modern term may be the usage in the United States of America, particularly in the southern states, of the title ma'am. So Jesus is not being disrespectful to his mother by calling her woman, which gives us one question solved. But what's with Jesus asking, "What to you and to me, ma'am?" Well, there's a range of opinions as to what Jesus' words might mean. Some scholars of the Bible want to say that Jesus is putting his mum in her place with these words. It's as if Jesus is saying, "What do you and I have in common, ma'am? You and I have totally different priorities. I'm here to save the world and save you and everyone else from sin, and you're wanting me to perform party tricks." Now, while that's one perspective, a view which may be regarded as something of the opposite extreme sees Jesus as perhaps upset that his mum won't come out and ask directly for assistance, making the meaning something along the lines of, making the meaning of "what to you and to me, ma'am," more along the lines of, "What happened between us, ma'am, that you feel you can't ask me directly for assistance? I still have time." Well, what are we to make of this? We have this range of opinions, and to be honest, these thinking of opinions are somewhat governed by whether people are Protestants and so therefore have an issue with the way Catholics have treated Mary, elevated Mary beyond what we find in Scripture. But then, obviously, the Catholic scholars have a different view as well. Well, what are we to make of this? I don't think we can give a definitive answer with absolute confidence because the language is too unusual. But three observations from the literary context, so the context of where it is in the story, can help us. First, Jesus' mother does not appear in any way to be offended by what Jesus says to her or how he says it. Not only would this affirm that using the title woman was acceptable, but it probably also means that Jesus wasn't putting her in her place. Second, Jesus' mother has absolute confidence that he will come to the assistance of the bridal party or hosts in their need. And as indicated, we see this indicated in her words to the servants: do whatever he tells you. So I don't think Jesus' mother took his words as a refusal. Third, Jesus does indeed assist these people, and probably in a way even more dramatic than what his mother expected. With the context in mind, I think the way the New International Version, which is what I read to us earlier, has translated this section in a helpful way. "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." I think that Jesus is genuinely asking his mum, "Ma'am, why are you involving me in this situation? It's not my time yet." But is it not Jesus' time yet? We think when the time comes, and in John's Gospel we see this, the time has arrived, is referring to Jesus' death upon the cross. But when Jesus says, "My time has not yet come," is it perhaps that Jesus' mum looks at the first disciples? Remember, this is in chapter 2. The first disciples only turn up at the end of chapter 1. So we've got these people starting to follow Jesus, and maybe Jesus' mum indicates that, well, if people are starting to follow you, then you need to know who they're following. Maybe your time is coming. And this, I think, sets the scene for the dramatic way in which Jesus will answer his mum's request, and thus give a sign which reveals his glory. Jesus is going to show to these new disciples something of who he truly is. So we finally turn to the miracle, and by this time you're possibly thinking, well, I'm in need of a drink. Well, you're in luck, because there's about to be a lot of it. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 80 to 120 litres. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." Now, the provision of between 480 and 720 litres of choice wine is pretty amazing and very generous. But how does it reveal Jesus' glory? Well, I'd like to suggest 3 ways. First, we're specifically told that the jars which were filled were those which were used by the Jews for ceremonial washing. Jesus is bringing in something new which will surpass the old ways by which the Jews had sought to be clean. Those ceremonial jugs are no longer necessary for cleansing. A better way is here. Second, Jesus is able to present his ministry and his very self as both the fulfillment of the old covenant and the surpassing of that covenant because of who he is. Specifically, Jesus does this because he is the Messiah and is bringing in God's kingdom. The Old Testament prophet Isaiah spent time describing what God's kingdom, the kingdom of the Messiah, would look like. Listen to Isaiah 25, verses 6 to 9. "On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. On this mountain he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all people, the sheet that covers all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces, and he will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. The Lord has spoken. In that day they will say, Surely this is our God. We trusted in him, and he saved us. This is the Lord. We trusted in him. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation." The Messianic kingdom, where God will save his people, will be characterized by there being the finest wine at the banquet. Jesus gives a foretaste of that banquet at this wedding. The quality of Jesus' wine is noted by the master of the banquet, who knows that it's after people who have had their fill and so are no longer so discerning, that lower quality wine can be brought out without fear that people will notice. In contrast, at this wedding, the best wine is only brought out near the end. So then, this miracle serves as a sign to reveal Jesus' glory, because it presents Jesus and his ministry as surpassing the old covenant system of how to be clean and right before God. This miracle also reveals Jesus to be the Messiah and the one who is bringing in God's kingdom, where people will enjoy choice wine. Third, this miracle displays Jesus' glory by showing that with him and in his kingdom there is abundance and generosity. As I mentioned, the total capacity of the stone water jars was between 480 and 720 litres, and they now contain fine wine. With Jesus the Messiah, there is an abundance of goodness. However, not only is there abundance with Jesus, there is also generosity. We know that at the time of Jesus' birth, that his family was poor. We know that because the offering that they made for his birth was 2 pigeons, and that was what poor people offered. If they were well off, they would offer a lamb. The wedding appears to be for people who were also not well off, as they had taken the considerable risk of running out of wine. It's likely the host could only afford to provide that which was already consumed. With the miracle that Jesus blesses them with, not only do they have an abundance for the banquet, but who will be left the remaining wine? Well, the newlyweds and the hosts. What a wonderfully generous gift of Jesus. Such high quality wine could be decanted into smaller containers and sold, giving the couple an extra help to the start of their married life. So the disciples saw Jesus' glory. The disciples believed that Jesus was the fulfillment of the Old Testament because he was God's promised Messiah who would bring in God's kingdom. The disciples also believed that Jesus surpassed the Old Covenant because he provided a better way of being clean before God than what the ceremonial washing had provided. But what about us? We aren't to focus upon the sign and marvel at how great it would be to have water turned into wine, or even just to desire the abundance of God's kingdom. We are to look beyond the sign to who it points to. Do we see Jesus' glory as we read about it in the scriptures? Will we likewise put our trust in Jesus as the one to make us right before God, and submit to Jesus as the King who rules over all? This is the challenge that is before us. And as we go through the 7 signs in John's Gospel, we will be confronted with this time and time again. And so I encourage you to reflect for yourself. Are you willing to look not at the sign, but at what the sign points to? And are you willing to give Jesus your allegiance? And are you willing to trust him for your eternal lives? May God bless you and guide you as you reflect on this. Thank you for joining me today.